Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Glenn, and this is the Unreasonable Farmer podcast. We talk to unreasonable people, unreasonable farmers doing unreasonable things because, as we know, all progress is made by someone who has been unreasonable at some point in time. And tonight we are talking to Naya Brangenberg. She is a veterinarian, and she also runs Longbush Free Range Pork with her husband, Jeremy. And I first came in touch with Naya, must have been 2016 or 2017, when she was working with the Ministry for Primary Industries in their animal welfare team. And I thought it would be great to have a chat with her about the way the pork industry works around the world, all the nitty-gritty questions, and then we'll talk about how they do it in a free-range environment. And there's all sorts of topics we can talk around there. So thank you very much, Naya, for joining us.
No problem.
It took a bit to get you here, but I'm glad you're here. You're actually you're actually a lot more knowledgeable on a lot more things other than pork, but maybe we can get into that.
Okay.
So let's just start off right at the very start of, and we start with piglets. And can you explain exactly how the pork industry works? Where do we get the pigs from, and so on?
So for pigs, when you look at production of pigs per kilogram of pork or meat produced, they are the most productive production animal. So let's just say from one sow, so that's a adult female pig that's had litters in the past, so she's a sow. If she hasn't had litters in the past, then she's what we call a gilt. So in her productive year, let's say like in a 365-day period, she can, in a traditional system, have approximately 2.5 to 3 litters per year. So if you take it on average, they have a 3-month, 3-week, 3-day, 115-day gestation. So on average, you're getting 2.5 to 3 litters out of a sow per year. And from that, in commercial and the high producing commercial herds, 19 to 24, 22 weeks, usually more towards the 19 weeks. Within 19 weeks from production of those piglets, from day 0, they can be finished and go into the food chain. And so it's a very short production life for those animals. So it's a very short life, but that's roughly, if they have anywhere from 15 to 18 piglets, and those pigs are, by the end, in New Zealand, they finish a little bit lighter weight than overseas. Overseas, the carcasses are heavier and bigger. But in New Zealand, let's say you've got a 50-kilogram carcass. These sows are putting, over the course of a year, potentially, I would say, 3 tons of pork from one sow per year, potentially. So when you look at that as compared to a ruminant, and you look at the say there's 30,000 roughly sows, even overseas, 30,000 sows is a small farm, whereas in New Zealand, that's quite a significant chunk of the whole industry. But
right.
but yeah,
yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. So let's go back. in tons of pork per sow, that's a good metric. But a sow will have, so he has 2.5, 2 litters a year. How many piglets in a litter?
Depends. So our farming system with free range, we prefer a smaller litter size, so 10 to 12. If you go back to pigs as a non-domesticated species, most of them, yes, you're looking more sort of the 5 to 10. You have a smaller litter size, but pigs have been domesticated. They've been crossed. Their fecundity has been improved over centuries. So now when you're looking at, a lot of the commercial herds indoors, they're wanting 20 to 24 piglets per sow per litter. It's not unusual for, 15 to 20 piglets per sow per litter. But yeah,
Um,
high performing herds, they want more than that even. Yeah.
how many teats are on a sow?
So for us, we like to have 16 teats on a sow, functional teats. So that's part of when you're picking your breeding stock, you're looking at titting is what we call it. So you just look at the titting. But yeah, even the commercial production sows, you are looking at still a sow with 16 teats, sometimes less.
Wow.
They use a system of cross fostering. So you have sows that you take some piglets off of at the end of their lactation, and then you
Hmm.
shift piglets that are new, younger piglets onto them, and then you can.
Right.
It's very, but that's why they do batch farrowing. So that's another term. So that's your timing, your insemination of the pigs such that they're all farrowing together at a similar time.
Hmm.
And when you do that, that then allows you to shift piglets around to make numbers more even across your sows, but also you can get out of one sow's lactation, you can get additional piglets through to weaning.
Okay. So,
Yep.
so a pig would have male and female piglets, obviously. So when we go to the supermarket or the butcher, are we buying, is pork just females or are they males as well? Doesn't matter.
Well, that's very consumer driven. So if you're in New Zealand, we don't do castration as a general rule in New Zealand in the pork industry.
Hmm.
So yes, you're getting boy pigs, girl pigs. Overseas in other countries, they do castration. So that's done without anesthetic. It's done without analgesia, local anesthesia. I do believe in Germany that they do have to, Germany and some of the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, they do have regulations around this. So local analgesia must be used. So local, you must use some block. And then there's also age restrictions on it. But the more wider practices, castration is done without any sort of pain relief. It's done when they're very young, and it's done not by veterinarians, it's done by farm staff. But in New Zealand, we just don't do that. So the key thing is trying to keep stress levels to a minimum. You just don't want to keep those. You don't want high levels of stress because that induces there's a pituitary axis, and it primes the system, and then it makes them at a younger age have more testosterone, and then the boar taint that people can smell, that's skate hole. So we try and
Oh,
finish the pigs at a very young age before they become sexually mature, before they start to have some of these sex steroid pituitary gland derived pheromones and things that are in the meat and affect meat quality. But the reason we get away with it in New Zealand too is that the New Zealand palate seems to tolerate a little bit of boar taint more so than in other commercial markets. In other commercial markets, people do not want to have, they want a very minimal to low levels of scatol, or the boar taint
right.
chemical.
So that would be similar to the beef industry where you would castrate a calf, a male calf, and that way you're not getting those like the hormones from the testicles, basically. Is that how it
Yeah,
works?
yep.
Which taints
Also,
the meat.
yeah. And behavior
Okay.
wise too, though. So for in ruminants, yes, you might be using castration as a means to prevent fighting, damage to each other, some of the behavioral components. And in pigs, there is a vaccine against boar taint. So if
Oh,
anyone's
really?
interested, I can explain it and everything. But again, it relies on that pituitary axis.
Mm.
So it's called Improvac. It has been used. There's an expense to it, so it requires 2 injections, and they cost roughly about $3 each. So if you multiply that across the large pig herd, then it can really add up. But it does reduce the amount of boar taint, and also it does improve feed efficiency by preventing the boars tend not to fight as much, or they tend to be a little less active. Sorry, sad to say.
Yeah.
But other than
Yeah.
that, yeah. So there's options. There are options out there other than using a surgical procedure like castration
Mm.
to control boar taint.
Well, I'm just wondering about the people I know who go pig hunting in the bush, and they, barrel up a pig. Are they going to eat a male pig, a male wild pig? It would be full of boar taint, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so a lot of people will, instead of using something like that for pork, like a pork chop, they would
Mm,
make a salami out of it. You would use ways of processing that pork that would either that strong flavor would enhance the product, or
mm-hmm,
you would do something that would mask the product. So a lot of, I do find, like, personally, that a lot of bacon that's made in New Zealand is quite heavily manuka smoked, and manuka is a very strong flavor anyway. So
mm,
I find that sometimes, depending on how you process the pork, you can pretty adequately mask the flavor, but also the toughness of the pork. So
okay.
sometimes like commercially bred and farmed pork is, of course, going to be more tender, and more, people just find suits their taste.
Okay. So just understanding the pork industry, you have a sow. She she gets pregnant somehow. Did you say artificially inseminated, or are they naturally
That's the
mated?
most common in the industry. Yeah. So most common in the industry is artificial insemination.
Okay.
A lot of semen is provided by, there are semen companies in New Zealand, but a lot of semen is imported.
Mm-hmm.
There's a global international pig genetics company called PIC. And so there's quite a bit of influence in genetics from overseas,
Right.
in the New Zealand pig herd. So shifting the New Zealand pig herd to genetics that suit our production style, it can't happen overnight. So
Mm-hmm.
so we do have to rely on, there's the different genetics for terminal sires. So we do the same thing with pigs that we do in ruminants. So you can cross different breeds, different types of pigs, to get different, and use terminal sires to get different um, characteristics in the end produced pigs, so the end
Mm-hmm.
pork. So there's a farm in the Waikato, Waratah Farms. They farm Durocs. So a lot of people will use a landrace or a large white cross sow. So often she's a very specific genetics or bloodline, and then you can use Hampshire or Duroc, a terminal sire semen. So there are semen suppliers in New Zealand. Pigs are very readily inseminated, so testing them for when they're in heat, it's very timed. They come on, they pretty much bang on come onto heat 4 days, 3 to 5, 4 days after weaning. So you can almost kind of, you can make production decisions based on quite specific time frames and planning forward. So yeah,
Uh,
so
so after weaning, you mean after she's weaned her litter, she will come onto heat.
come on
What
to
did you
heat.
say? 4 days later.
4 days, pretty much. Yep, yep. So four
Wow.
days after that post-weaning heat, as long as she's in good body condition, she'll
Okay.
come into heat. You can test that. You can use teaser bores. You can also just, she displays very specific behaviors that you can make her, you can induce her. You can just basically put your hand over her shoulder and put weight, and she'll stand, and she'll
Right.
show behaviors that show she's receptive. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, and then you have your chilled semen, and you can inseminate them readily. It's literally something that a technician, a person, can learn to do quite readily. Yeah, so insemination in pigs is very common. So I would say natural mating is probably less used, particularly in indoor. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but most people, even in the outdoor pig farms, that to get the genetics, you might have some boars around, but you can have these big mobile insemination, mobile yards, covered yards, and you
Mm-hmm.
can put them in, and then with the sows you can get them into that area, and then you can inseminate them, and then you just pick that the whole thing up, and then move it to the next paddock.
Mm. Well, I know I get a few inquiries about artificial insemination of cows, and I think it got a bad name from a certain documentary in the US. But is it painful for the pigs, or is it the anesthetic
Well,
or anything?
I mean, it just depends on how you view it. I mean, the reality is that with most of these things we do with these animals, they are not given a choice to do these things. They're
Mm.
in a pen confined area. We make them exhibit a behavior which is a natural behavior, but yeah, we are inseminating them. So by legally by I've read the same article. I thought it was a fascinating discussion. And I read a lot of that was on social media. But yeah, I don't feel that we do them any physical harm. We don't use artificial insemination on our farm. We use natural mating only. But yeah, so personally, I don't find we do any harm, but we don't use artificial insemination. So
on your farm?
on our farm, we don't. We use boars. So the boars do the work. The boars do the job. The boars, we rotate them around. Because I think one of the key welfare things is on all farms is that you have to look after not only the piglet welfare, the sow welfare, but you have to look after boar welfare. So there is parts of the codes around boars. So yeah. So again, it's one of the things that we do just slightly differently as we approach it slightly differently. And I think that I think a lot of these ethical discussions, I'd like to think that we can kind of see both ways of it. And so a lot of our management decisions are based on, taking as much standing back of human intervention as we can, while allowing the pigs to do what they naturally would do.
Well, that's a timely comment from Kaylee. What is the benefit of artificial insemination over natural?
I think the key thing for artificial insemination is it's in what is perceived as commercial and profitable. Again, these things are economically driven and profit driven. Is you don't have the price and the cost of feeding a boar. You don't have the risk of boars not working. Boars, if they get an injury, if they get an illness, their fertility can be affected, and it could be potentially, it could be 3 or 4 months. It could be an entire mating cycle after the fact before you would realize that a boar has had reduced fertility. So that's like 3, nearly 4 months of production loss. You'd be scanning the girls at roughly about 45 days after breeding to make sure that they got pregnant. If you saw that there was pregnancy loss or things like that. So artificial insemination gives you, because of the boars being collected, would have the semen analyzed. You'd be looking at fertility factors within the semen. So with artificial insemination, you have a little bit more assurance around the fertility of the boar and the quality of the semen. The reduced cost, so you're not paying for feeding and housing and looking after and doing all the testing for those boars. So yeah. So I would say that, and then again, boars, you have to, they take up space where the boar paddocks are. So if you house these animals inside of houses, just getting a cardboard box with all of your semen takes up a lot less space than having an entire barn just for your boars. So
yeah. Okay.
But at the end of the day, it all leads down to money, though. It's usually financial and economic concerns that make artificial insemination preferable for some people.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Kaylee. Do boars, are they dangerous? Do they fight like bulls? Or
Yeah. Boars can be occupant. A lot of the things too. So when you think about the choices people make about the systems they farm in, and why they farm the way they do, with pigs, occupational health and safety is as important, if not more important, probably, than some of the pastoral systems, dairy farming systems, things like that. But boars can be very dangerous to work with, very unpredictable, very dangerous to deal with. They are very powerful animals. Rocket, our largest boar, who's Hampshire, who's lovely. Jeremy and I know him very well, so we work with him. But we would never send someone who we don't know into a paddock with a boar. Like, we just wouldn't do it. We trim their tusks. We try and make it as safe as we can. But no. A boar could kill someone readily. Honestly, the real truth is they could do very serious damage. So you have to be very careful about boars.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about bulls. I mean, a bull, when it gets over 2 years of age, it becomes actually a hazard. And, I've had some dodgy moments with a 700 kg bull. So,
Yeah.
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 Okay, so at what age? So we have the litter. The sow has her litter. There's, how much did you say? 16 to 16 odd in a litter.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty decent 16, 17 is, I think most
Yep.
farmers would find that acceptable, but
Yep.
farmers pushing the envelope and wanting to really maximize
Mm.
profitability, they want 19, 20,
Okay.
they want
Yeah. Yeah.
20,
Yeah.
even 25. So
And
so
what
yeah.
age do? Oh, sorry. Yep. At what age do you wean the litter, or do they send them off to be more slaughtered? I suppose.
Well, weaning's different than finishing. So weaning
Okay.
is generally 28 days, can be as early as 29, 21 days. But they take a real check. So weaning's probably one of the most stressful periods in a pig's entire life, a commercial pig's entire life. Weaning is it's a very significant part.
Mm.
So weaning's around, sort of the 4 week mark. But we're expecting those pigs to be 75, 80 kilograms live weight for
Hmm.
slaughter by 19, 20 weeks of age. So it's a very short
Okay.
life for pigs. Yeah.
Okay. So you wean them around only 4 weeks. So that's they're living with their mother, drinking what 100% milk, and then maybe
That's the
access
key
to
thing
meal.
for weaning. Key thing for weaning do it successfully is they need to be eating at least a significant part of their diet, enough to maintain their own metabolism of solid food. So that's
Okay.
asking an animal to convert from a 100% milk-based diet
Mm.
to a majority. And again, these are very specialized diets. Like farms will have supplementary milk supply for when they're their first early weeks. Then they'll introduce liquid feeds and liquid concentrates, and then they will
Hmm.
introduce creep feeds. There's a whole series of diets and formulations of diets to make to make them palatable to them at a very young age, and it's taking advantage of piglets' need to explore, and they're very precocial. So they're out and about and exploring. Within minutes of birth, they're finding the teat and suckling already. So they're very
Mm.
precocious. So yeah. So they are. It's a very specific process to get pigs to be able to be weaned successfully at 28 days, and farmers
Okay.
have to get that right. Otherwise, there's huge impacts. So it behooves
Mm.
them for production to get it right.
So when you said weaning is stressful, your meaning is stressful for the piglet, or it's stressful for the sow, or both?
I would say very stressful for the piglet. So demonstrably stressful for the piglet. So they experience a check. Their immune systems are extremely challenged. A lot of vaccination
Mm.
is derived around supporting them through the weaning period.
Mm.
So a lot
Okay.
of respiratory vaccines, PMWS, post weaning multisystemic wasting syndrome. So
Hmm.
again, the immunosuppression from stress around period of weaning can lead to lots of other health issues. There's
Mm.
a demonstrable check in their growth rate post weaning, and so most farms focus on how quickly they can get those piglets back to eating enough food to make sure their metabolism is maintained. So there's all
Mm.
sorts of targeted strategies around weaning and how to do it right, and how to keep piglets from experiencing the effects longer term of that stress. They want to minimize that stress and keep it as sort of tight around weaning as they can.
So what does a pig eat?
Well, primarily pigs primarily pigs would eat a lot of soybeans. So so the pigs in commercial pigs are fed formulated diets, grain based. A lot of it's soy based, but
Hmm.
barley, peas. There's always at the base level of pig diets. It's called a premix. So it's all of those trace minerals, the essential amino acids they need from the premix. You build a diet around it. So using barley, wheat, peas, soybeans. You use blood meal if you need extra protein. So in New Zealand, you can use blood meal. It's a processed product. So yeah. So diets are formulated based on the availability of the grain. They nutritionists. So all of the feed companies and pig producers have nutritionists that create a series of diets. So pig farms can have 8, 9, 10 different diets. Early lactation, pre-lactation, early gestation, late gestation, sow diets. They can have growing diets, finishing diets, pre-weaning diets. You name it. There's a diet for probably that stage of production. Some farms mill all of this themselves, so they get the premixes. They have all their grains. Their nutritionist gives them a recipe. There's even there's some farms in New Zealand that can actually take human food waste, so food waste product. So that's usually byproducts of food production, not necessarily food waste, but it's byproduct. So let's say like there's a whole bunch of cheese. So they can take on that cheese, they can process it. So that implies heat treatment. And then they can have those as additional parts of the diet. So they can formulate liquid diets, and they can have additional food available to pigs that is liquid. But yeah, so it's still grain based primarily, but they do have high protein. To get the feed conversions and the protein production of pork, you do have to put protein in, and that's expensive.
Yeah. And you guys in your free range environment, do you still feed them predominantly meal?
Yeah. So that's why even though we are free range, we would still be considered an intensive farming system, because we bring into the system 95% of the food for the pigs. The other 5% is anything they get from the crops and the grass and the pasture and everything we have available to them. But yeah, we bring a lot of nutrient onto the farm, even though we're a free range, what would be considered some sort of an extensive system in pig world. We're still an intensive farm. Yeah.
Right. And what would a pig eat in the wild?
Oh, so very omnivorous. So they would be scavenging. Again, a big reason why pigs are a TB reservoir. So, if they find something that's like a dead possum, dead ruminant, they would be in there. They'd be eating that. But they'd be primarily going for, they would be going for greenery. They'd be going for nuts. They'd be going for arthropods. Like they'd be going for grubs and insects and things like that. They would,
and truffles.
Yeah. They would definitely be going for that. But when truffles are just lying about, but
I just thought of that.
Yeah.
I
Well,
didn't.
now
I
they
just
use
thought
dogs for it, so
do
there's
they
no
don't use
opportunities
pigs?
there anymore. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so so I suppose where to start. There's so many different ways. So explain to us what farrowing crates are, and because that's hit the news recently.
So when pigs became when pigs used to be part of a diversified farm system. So when let's say you watch some of those like Victorian Farm or Edwardian Farm on sort of BBC, you see how pigs have a component part of those farming systems. When pigs were taken out of being a component of some of these farm systems and became a intensive pig focused farm, the thing that's the most evident is that they will take up so much labor costs. It's not just that when you have to feed them and you don't have food waste like milk or things like that to feed them, or spent grains and things like that from brewing and things. So when you actually target just producing pork, when you take them out of a bigger system, you have the huge expense of feeding them, but the next expense is labor. So many of the things that we see as modern pig farming are not at all because of how necessarily pigs should be farmed. It's because of how humans have found a way to farm pigs that is as efficient as possible for human labor.
Mm.
So when you think about pig behavior, pigs have smaller litters. They used to be smaller. They were smaller in stature, smaller litter size. So now what we've done is we want these bigger pigs, faster growing pigs, and we want more of them. So what we've done is we've taken away as much of the ability of sows to determine where they want to farrow, their to dictate their own fertility in some respects. So we've genetically bred them to be what is now called, there's a term for them being hyper prolific. So they have large, very large, abnormally large litter sizes. So when you do that, and then you also need to get them in pig regularly, and you need to wean them. So we're taking away the whole series of behaviors that they need to exhibit to be maternal. So what we've done is to make it easier to cram 100 sows into one shed, have them all farrow within 48 hours of each other. We've timed them into we've kind of backed them into a corner. So sows now, some of them don't even recognize that these piglets are their own. They don't communicate in the same way with piglets. They don't recognize the behaviors of lying down that make it safe for the piglets to be around them. So this is kind of like chicken and the egg. Like, all of these behaviors have sort of been taken away from them, so then they stop exhibiting them. So then we kind of create a solution to a problem that we've created. And so one of the problems that we've created is that sows will they're very large now. They have to be large because they have to have these big uterus size capacity, so that way then they can have these 25 piglets. So we've put them into crates. So we've made them stand in one place. They can't turn around. They can only stand or lie down for up to 5 weeks per farrowing. And so that's the thing, is that is that right? So farrowing crates, those are the ethical questions. We don't accept stanchion barns in New Zealand. Stanchion barns have pretty much even gone the way in the States and overseas. Most places don't use stanchion barns where cows are tied into head stalls 24/7, 365. So there's things that have gone the wayside, but yet in pig farming we find it acceptable to have these animals for the protection of the piglets. So there the argument is that it's protecting the piglets, but at the expense of what?
Yeah.
So
well, just to clarify, Longbush Free Range Pork do not use farrowing crates.
Yeah. And so the part of the industry that uses farrowing crates, they would say that they would find, and there've been studies that have been done, and that the mortality rate from overlying. So overlying is when sows lie on piglets. One study said that it was for the study that was done, was that the outdoor bred farms, it had a 20% mortality. We don't have that on our farm, but 20% mortality of piglets. Some farmers would say, from the indoor perspective of why they use farrowing crates, that level of mortality is unacceptable.
So how do you combat it? Well, explain your system and why you don't use farrowing crates.
So a whole we didn't come into pig farming as pig farmers. We came into pig farming as people that first owned pigs as pets. So we had kunis. Then we had some lovely heritage breed large blacks that were semi-pets, but then a little bit of population control failure. So we started ending up with more pigs. So the whole approach that we have and have always come at pig farming is that the pigs they're highly intelligent animals. They've been doing what they need to do for a long time. So let's not interfere with that. Let's work with it. Let's support it as best we can. So we accept and like to have. We don't genetically select. We haven't done any selection pressure for sows to be hyper prolific. We have 10 to 12 piglets per litter, which we always make sure that we have more teats than piglets. So, we're selecting sows with 14 to 16. Oh, Chris.
Yeah.
Gertie is quite lovely. She's going to be quite a challenge to find the right boar for her because she's going to be quite the character, I can tell.
Well, just while we're on that, if you want to see Chris's pig, go to his social media. But also, go if you've got an open tab, go to Longbush Free Range Pork on Twitter. You're on Facebook, Instagram as well.
Instagram, not on. Well, we're on Facebook too, but I don't really post much to Facebook.
I follow you on Twitter. It's great. I don't have a separate screen tonight, but I should show you videos of what their farm looks like. And Jeremy, it's lovely. It's great. I love seeing your posts, and it gives a really good insight into how Naya's farm is compared to, I suppose, the Farrowing crates that we're talking about. But we've also got Hugh listening from Japan. Thanks, Hugh.
Oh, good. Yay.
Yeah, very timely. We don't castrate and just bought medicine to suppress boar activity. Thanks for arranging these talks. Well, just as much for me, I'm really interested in how pork is about the whole industry. So I've cut you off. I forgot what you were saying, but
what was it?
Anyway, you were talking before about how pigs or a sow can produce a heck of a lot of pork from a certain amount of feed. They're very efficient. So can you explain that to us?
Well, it's just sheer numbers. So just how quickly you can raise up, how many litters per year, because they cycle year round. So you don't have the seasonality of production associated with beef, lamb. So again, they can cycle year round. You can wean at 28 days. That means she's going to come into season 4 days after that. So on average, throughout a sow's lifetime, that's 2.5, 3 litters per year. You can just see how if they have 15, 20 piglets and each of those finish at a certain weight, that per sow, you're producing, if 3 times, 4 times the amount that you would see in kilogram of meat at the end of the day product than a ruminant. So that's what I mean by the productivity of pigs and per sow. They're the most efficient. Their carcass yield also is extremely high. So a pig is going to yield like 78%. So it's going to be there's very little wastage on a pig carcass. The amount of products you can make from a pig, again, it's a huge range of products. They go into everything. There's the bones, gelatin, numerous byproducts. So pigs, just the efficiency of the use of a pig is also, it's very impressive.
So it's a combination of just the litter size and the fact that a pig gets to just under 6 months before it goes away, compared to a bull, or a steer or a cow, it would be 2 years of age. I suppose chickens are another example where a meat chicken is 8 weeks or something like that before.
Oh, it's terrible, the meat chicken. Yeah, God, you feel terrible for those birds. It's awful. Yeah.
Well, we'll have a podcast on meat chickens in the future.
Yeah, it's awful.
Okay, so it's not so much an ability for a pig to convert feed into meat better than a cow or anything else. It's just that litter size basically and the
Litter
time.
size, yep, yep. And
Yeah.
your feed conversion ratio for pigs is always going to be better in an indoor setting, because again, the pigs aren't running around. They're not, they don't have thermal stresses that they have to deal with like in an outdoor setting.
Hmm.
So your feed conversions are always going to be, definitely higher in indoor, very climate controlled. Um, but, but yeah, you have to put protein in to get
Mm.
protein out for a pig. They're not going to be converting it in the same way that a ruminant is going to be with a ruminant
Yeah.
system, digestive
Yeah.
system. So they're monogastric system. So think of it like humans. Like if you're a bodybuilder, you've got to put protein in to put the muscle
Mm.
on. So that's where the cost comes in, and the feed component. So you do have expenses that way.
Yeah. And you were saying before that New Zealand is increasing its pork consumption.
Yeah, New Zealand, we very much like our pork here. Of the tonnages of pork imported per month, it's really impressive. So New Zealand does not have an export market in pork. There might be a couple of tons going to Taiwan or Singapore or something, like very small amounts though. We're talking, this, it's not a significant component of in New Zealand of export dollars in pork
Mm.
production. It's domestic supply, and that is far outstripped by the amount of pork imported, unfortunately.
Mm. Well, I
So New
remember
Zealanders love cheap bacon.
we love cheap bacon. And where does our cheap bacon come from?
Primarily overseas, Poland, Canada,
Hmm.
a lot of countries that, you read it in Farmers Weekly, and we can't bang on enough about it, but there really is quite a disparity between the welfare of pork produced in many of the overseas countries that we import pork from, than New Zealand standards. So we do have higher standards of pork production, and if there is the result from the recent High Court decision that farrowing crates do have a limited time span, maybe 2025, they may be phased out, etc. These things coming down the path, towards the New Zealand pork industry. Some of these things are world leading. If farrowing crates are
Mm.
banned, their use banned in New Zealand after a certain period of time, how can we justify allowing, you know,
Mm.
massive amounts? So greater than 60% of the monthly pork consumption of New Zealand. How do we justify that coming from overseas countries that don't meet our own welfare standards?
Yeah, and well, I was always under the impression it was 70% of our pork is imported, and I thought sow crates or farrowing crates were already outlawed in New Zealand.
So there's a couple. So farrowing crates are different than sow stalls. So in a
Oh.
lot of overseas countries, sows are kept in some form of confinement throughout their whole lives.
Mm.
So yes, so in New Zealand, sows cannot be confined in a farrowing crate past the time when they're lactating so between farrowing and weaning. So the target is very quite focused. So
Mm.
they then don't go into another system of crates or stalls where they spend their time gestation. So there's things like gestation stalls and mating stalls. There's quite a few other means of confinement of sows that happen in other countries. But yes, those do not
Mm.
exist in New Zealand currently. Those have already been phased out. Yeah.
So why can't the New Zealand pork industry supply New Zealand's demand?
Size, less than 100 farms in New Zealand. You know, and again, the farm size in New Zealand is also smaller. So yeah, it's a very small industry. It's a fraction of the size of the beef and dairy sectors. So we are talking about a very small industry. And New
Mm,
Zealanders, they like cheap pork. They want a lot more pork than the number of farms in New Zealand could supply. Yep.
right.
And
So,
also, there's no incentive to start up any pig farming in New Zealand because the price of imported pork, which is produced in subsidized production systems, so these countries, they heavily subsidize pork producers. So
mm,
coming in, the pork coming in, New Zealand farmers cannot produce pork for the price that it can be imported in. It just can't, not without
no.
subsidies. And the implementation of moving away from farrowing crates could very much be, you know, the final nail in the coffin of quite a few of the farms in New Zealand.
That's an interesting point there where regulation can have unintended consequences. So here we are, we want to improve the welfare of pigs in New Zealand, which is a worthy cause. But you were saying, well, that puts the New Zealand pork producers, which are already behind the less economic than international suppliers. So they simply shut their farms down, and we import more pork, which is produced in far less ethical manner.
Yep, yep. So as part
Mm,
of any of the process of implementing these regulations, economic impact analysis is done, and that's part of that economic impact is the
mm,
loss. How do you balance these things? If it can be done with less impact, then it should be done in that way. So I think that all that's work that's happening, and
mm,
NZ Pork, our representative body, is playing a pretty big role in that, in helping work through all of those potential things. The big thing too they're pushing for is country of origin labeling, because a lot of
mm.
times people just aren't aware of these things. This is a really complex issue, and it just can't be distilled down into just little sort of sound bites, or, it's piglet versus sow. There's a lot going on in the background. But at the very least, if we could get people to understand this pork came from New Zealand, it's produced under these systems. This pork wasn't produced, or even more importantly, this pork, yes, this bacon may have been made into bacon in New Zealand, but the pork came from Poland or Germany. That kind
Yeah.
of information, people, how we have to help the consumer to make the right decisions. We can't just force upon them the expectation that they're going to do what's right without giving them at least a little bit of help in the right direction.
Yeah, and I mean, we're still talking of country of origin labeling, and I think we've been talking about this for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
yeah,
It didn't
it,
seem like it should take this long, but yeah. But hey, we just got an end to the live export ban, so baby steps.
yeah, and it's interesting what you say when and this is what we've found with happy cow milk. You really have to understand the economics behind the whole industry to understand why something is done a certain way, even why we don't use reusable packaging for milk. There's very clear economic reasons why supermarkets and milk processors don't do it.
Yeah.
And to do something different, you can't just say, "Oh, we're going to ban this," or which may seem good and it has the right intention, but it actually won't affect anything in the end. In fact, could hurt the industry. I think that's what you've just said about the pork industry.
Yep.
Um, and maybe this is the end. The end result is maybe consumers just need to pay more for pork.
Yeah, and I think there is the will there to just shift the bar. Like there are a lot of people struggling out there, and I am absolutely not going to judge them for getting protein on their plate and in a manner that they can afford. Like absolutely, there's a place for that. But if we could get more people to maybe buy outdoor bred pork, which
Mm,
is very well done in New Zealand. The New Zealand climate suits outdoor produced pork very well. There's lots of those producers out there, so that's the Freedom Farms label. So there is accessibility to just that little bit higher welfare pork, for not that different of a price point. That again, with just providing people with information, providing people with a reason to try and make that choice, and say, maybe you don't buy 2 packs of the cheap bacon, but maybe you buy 1 pack of just this bacon that was produced in a way without farrowing crates. That should be something maybe to strive for, versus making people feel bad about the choices that they're making when that's all they can afford.
Yeah, I think a lot of people actually want to make the right choices. As you said, it's very difficult to find out whether you're making the right choice. I've looked for pork in the supermarket and looked for the country of origin, and I couldn't find it.
Yep. Yeah.
But if you want to know exactly where to get it from, go to that website, longbushpork.co.nz. And I have tried it. It's fantastic. Yeah, so there was a recent, you said about, oh no, we've covered the sow crates or the farrowing crates. Chris has got a comment here. He wants to, we've talked about this, Chris. Gertie spends lots of time grazing and browsing. How much of your pig's diet comes from this?
So because they do graze quite a bit, and some pigs are more rooters, so some of them will actually turn the soil over and go for the insects, arthropods, and stuff like that in the soil. But I, as a general rule, I'm always making sure, when I talk to people that have pet pigs, I'm always telling them at least make sure 50% or higher, really needs to be quite a significant portion of their diet, really needs to be a formulated pig feed. The grazing and browsing, for kuni pigs, which have definitely genetically evolved to be very, their metabolism's quite efficient, and they're very good at grazing and browsing and maintaining their body condition and metabolism with just that, with using browse and graze. But for a pig like Gertie, she still needs probably two kilograms of nuts a day, and then she can graze and browse whatever she wants in addition to that. But the pigs do. Patrick Morell at Massey has done some pretty good work that they can convert, like a sort of a pseudo hindgut fermentation process with microbial input. They can have some uptake of amino acids from pasture. So 5 to 10%, so of their metabolism, yes, they might get from breakdown of browse and grazing, but yeah, the significant portion of her diet still needs to come in the form of a cereal grain based formulated diet with the right amino acid balance, particularly lysine. So yeah.
Okay,
but
well,
she can also get fruits and veggies and stuff, but no parsnips or parsnip tops that can cause blistering lesions, which look just like foot and mouth disease.
Who would have thought?
Don't do that. Don't do parsnips.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of the interview. If anyone's got any questions, if I've left anything out, just put them in the comments before we go. One thing that we had pigs on the dairy farm growing up, and when the pigs got out, they would just destroy the paddock, just rut it up.
Yep. Huge pest. So good on people. The one thing you always have to think about is welfare of pest species. The welfare of pigs and pig hunting and pig dogs. It's a whole nother sort of area where I just sort of like, oh God. But they can do tremendous damage. So we've got very good fencing. Pigs very much respect electric fencing. So a combination of netting and electric fencing. We also have everything double fenced. So we've got, 2 lines of defense of anybody escaping. But all our pigs are out of the waterways. So all of the waterways have been fenced off on our farm because, again, the damage they can do is absolutely incredible. So they are a pest species when not in commercial or farmed settings. So yeah.
So when they put in their snout in the ground, their tusk, are they digging up looking for pests, looking for grubs, that sort of thing?
Yep. But they'll also eat the roots of plants too. So
Ah,
occasionally you get the perfect pig who will just eat the thistle roots. So they're very nice to have. They can grub your whole paddock for you.
oh,
But no, they are generally, you have pigs that really love it. And so those pigs, we do have to ring them, unfortunately. For years, we didn't ring pigs at all. We didn't do anything. But the destruction and new regulations coming on board want to have at least 75% pasture cover on pig farms, outdoor pig farms at all times. The ideal is actually 90% grass cover at all times. That's to prevent leaching and surface erosion and surface water nutrient washout. So we have to really focus as outdoor free range pig farmers. We have to focus on our pasture covers. So we have had to use nose rings to control rooting,
yeah,
unfortunately.
because they root up the ground, which then kills the grass, and then they walk all over it, and it turns to mud, and then it looks terrible.
Not only looks terrible, but when it does rain,
Yeah.
then all of that nutrient just washes into waterways and things. So that's why we've had to put a lot of we've got 5-year planting plan. We're in the year 3 of it. So every riparian border, every fence line border, everything has grass, long grass all the time, and has plantings. So lots of absorptive stuff to catch any surface water flow.
Mm.
Yep.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I've appreciated your time, and I would encourage anyone listening to go to longbushpork.co.nz and order some pork from Naya and Jeremy.
Or from Woody's farm or homegrown farm fresh. So we don't sell pork anymore. So we used
Oh, you
to.
don't? Oh, you sell it
Nope.
through them?
Yeah, sell it through them. Yeah. We just
Oh,
focus
yeah.
on the farming. They focus on making delicious things to eat.
Oh, yeah. I remember watching him on Country Calendar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's great. Just the last comment here from Marty. Thank you, Naya and Glenn. Priceless information for us consumers. Yeah, and we appreciate your time, Naya, and thank you very much. And we've got another one here. So informative. Thank you from Jasmine. And yeah, we'll have you on again, Naya, because we didn't talk about animal. No, yeah. We'll give you a break.
The stress
We'll
for
give you a
this one
break,
nearly
but
killed me. Oh my God.
oh, we're going to talk about animal sentience and all that sort of stuff. You're very good
Oh,
at that,
okay.
and
I can do that. Yeah.
and yeah. So, but thank you for your time. I know we've kept you up, and we appreciate you giving it up. And thanks everyone for listening. And please send any comments or to me, and we can hopefully get them answered. But thank you very much, and we'll see you guys all later.